So there's a definite urge to increase transparency to help rebuild trust. And my question to the panel is, does transparency help to rebuild trust? And is that always the case?
I think transparency can help, but I don't think it's the only ingredient to trust. I think that you think about GDPR and the key principles within GDPR. It talks about lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, amongst others. Clearly, transparency alongside legitimacy helps in terms of then knowing how to use information in what context. However, I would also say that trust can be built over a long period of time and can be lost in an instant. And therefore then, trust goes wider than just being able to show some reasons from rationale for decision or even data itself. It's more about actually being credible. So being very truthful about what you know and what you understand and what you don't. Being reliable, delivering on commitments that are being made. Being open and also interested in customer. So customer, again, against the UN principles also features quite richly. Understanding the customer, what's the customer trying to do, what are they trying to achieve is incredibly important. Supporting that customer with a relationship that's strong is there. But also then trying to put the customer and the stakeholder community first with a balanced scorecard. So it's not just about the customer, it's about having that balanced scorecard as well. So transparency helps with all of those aims, but I don't think it's the only ingredient.
Okay. Anybody else?
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think, unfortunately, this is another area where the law has had to come in, actually underpin certain key principles like GDPR. So, it existed before, but it was felt by, the regulators, the legislators, that was an important thing to do. Don't disagree at all, but it had to be done, and therefore that's a shame. But that it had to happen. It should have happened by itself anyway. If you look at other things like subject access requests, now anybody individually out there can request information of themselves from institutions. That's a very good thing. That again is a legal principle, as I understand it. So we've got to get to a place, I think, where we're doing these things off our own back rather than the regulator having to underpin it first. That's the wrong way around, totally the wrong way around. Especially now we're moving into a different era where the industry has moved on. We should be now much more open and transparent, and hopefully, that's progressing. I think it is, but I think we've probably all got some way to go. So there is a tendency to only publish what you have to publish. And perhaps we ought to, between us all, start to publish some more things. Even people like us, perhaps, who's not a PLC, we're not a quoted PLC. We're going to be more explicit about, kind of our CSR type principles rather than just the bland statements that a lot of people used to put in their annual accounts. We want to be much more inclusive in that, and also talk more about what we're doing with our staff, because I think customers might welcome how the staff that are serving them are being treated themselves. Mm-hmm. So there's more we can do.
Indeed, yes. Do you all agree that transparency is a good thing?
I think it's got restrictions, as Elaine says. It's, typically a relationship we have of trust, we wouldn't describe it as a transparent relationship. We typically trust our families, our doctors, our friends. We don't use transparency as a term to express that. And I think it's quite interesting if we put it in the perspective, as James Susan Rice was saying earlier, we know that trust is declining, yet there is more information out there than we've ever had before. We can find out huge amounts of information. We can, as Charles was saying as well, access any amount of information we couldn't get before. So there is a lot more transparency, there is a lot more openness. But I just think the mistake is to link that too closely to building trust. I think if you're a very secret organisation, yes, of course, trust is going to be difficult to achieve. But I think there's a misplaced link between transparency and trust. It also gets back to what one of my colleagues was saying earlier about it's what you do in secret that matters most in some regards. It gets back to one of Plato's principles. What matters is when you're not being watched. So actually what matters is, are you honest? Do you have integrity? Are you going to put your customers' interests first? Whether they actually see you doing that, well, that's a great check. but it's not necessary for trust in itself.
I think it's building on that. It's about, when you're thinking about transparency, it's about appropriate transparency. So am I making a piece of information available to somebody who will then be able to digest that piece of information and know what to do with it? Or actually, by providing that piece of information, actually, I go on to confuse them further. So it is about appropriate transparency, which I think then can lend itself towards trust.